Sometimes when you find yourself in a situation where what you're seeing doesn't necessarily make sense. Now, I'm not describing, walking through a desert and suddenly coming across a frost giant. I'm talking something more subtle where you're exploring these vast hills and plains where there's not really been a lot of wildlife to speak of, or at least wildlife that you have been told about. When you come across a hill giant, and if you're a hypercritical asshole like me, you might look and think, well, what is that hill giant eating? I'm Dungeon Drew, and today we're going to be talking about how to make your wilderness environments feel a little bit more authentic using the ecological principle of food chains. We'll discuss what exactly a food chain is, how to implement it within your world, and then also how to subvert the expectations that you're going to be able to create with it with maximum efficiency. A normal food chain would look something like this. Energy travels up the chain till eventually it reaches the last consumer, which we often refer to as the apex predator. Everything has a natural flow, but if we take this and we apply it to how we prepare our wildernesses, we can then create a hierarchy of things to fill out our world with. Let's take a look at that plains example we mentioned earlier and figure out what we need to do to help our apex predator, in this case, a hill giant, live a full, happy, healthy life. And I prefer doing it this way where we start top down because typically the apex predator of whatever region you're preparing will in one way or another be directly tied into the adventure that you're running in that area. So it just makes sense to kind of build what you know you want, take what you know you want, and then build down from there. The first step that I always like to do is I kind of just like to take a quick little glance at the thing that we're going to be building around. In this case, a hill giant, right? Just very basically, we know that they are tough, they're big, and they're not really that intelligent, which means that they're not going to utilize things like more direct trade with other individuals, and they're not going to set complex traps. So we have to figure out if something is sustaining a creature this large, how is that going to happen? How are we going to sustain a creature that is this size and make it seem realistic? There's a couple things that kind of pop to mind of ways that we could conceivably feed this hill giant. There could be a goblin tribe nearby that hunts and gathers their own food, and in payment for protection, this goblin tribe gives a portion of it to the hill giant, and the hill giant kind of hangs out nearby and can offer assistance if they need to. Maybe there's nearby farms or settlements and things like that where the hill giant kind of just goes and plucks up some livestock whenever they feel like it, and the town people are kind of over it, but they're not quite strong enough to stand up to it themselves. Additionally, right, if we were going to have the hill giant hunt a prey animal, we have to have a prey animal that is not, one, fast enough to outrun the hill giant, and two, could survive having a boulder thrown at Mach 5 directly at it and not be turned to mush. So that kind of leaves a couple things, but I would say like a mammoth, and that kind of brings me to the mammoths of Skyrim. So we'll probably avoid that one as to not tread on ground we've already explored. You can already see how when we're adding these layers and looking at these relationships between the hill giant and things that it might eat, we are then filling out our world. Suddenly we have a goblin tribe, we have nearby helpful NPCs, and we have something that we can put in our random encounter table, say we want to use a mammoth or something like that. I think to really dive into this concept, we're going to focus on something that I hadn't discussed, which is what if there was this giant ant mound nearby? The hill giant can show up and feast on these ants that are the size of, a large dog. Their bites and their stingers can't really do anything to deter this hill giant. He can eat his fill and go about his day. They're insects, right? They don't have a concept of a counterattack or vengeance or anything like that, and they reproduce fast enough that it's kind of an infinite food glitch for our hill giant. If we wanted to from here, we could discuss what are the ants going to eat. For the sake of brevity, we're not going to get into that here, but as you could see, we could start expanding on that, and eventually we have this web and chain of food, which is kind of just a chain of energy. Using this kind of in-world logic will help a dungeon master then apply what every good game of D&D needs: consequences. Through interaction and intervention within this system, your player characters are going to have effects on the environment that make sense. So let's just say our party of intrepid adventurers have their sights set on this hill giant, they come across it, they slay it. Perfect. A couple days later, suddenly the town that hired them to get rid of this giant is overrun by these massive ants. Well, what happened with the hill giant no longer there to keep their numbers down? The ant colony has expanded and is now foraging into town. Well, now your players have a new problem. They have to go deal with these ants that the hill giant was currently doing for them. We can reverse this in the other way and say, hey, your party, they're not quite strong enough to take on a hill giant. Well, they're going to go after these ants that have been kind of bothering the town. They end up wiping out the mound, and then suddenly the hill giant has nothing to eat. Now that hill giant that your players may have been aware of but actively trying to avoid is now a new issue that they are going to have to face, all because of the consequence of their action. And as your players get more used to this and seeing how the ways that these things interconnect and there are consequences to their action, what you might find is that your players are going to be more mindful of what kind of influence they have on the world. There's a very real possibility where, say, whatever the problem is, whatever the adventure requires they deal with, whether it be hill giant or ants, they may figure out we can create a system in which the hill giant tends to the ants and the ants keep the hill giant pacified, and then we don't have to mess with either of them. That's a creative problem solving that you wouldn't get if it was just, okay, I'm looking at my environment, there's a hill giant here that I want my players to fight. Okay, they're gonna go fight the hill giant, and the hill giant just kind of there and does his thing and, maybe just bothers the farmers or something like that. And if you do this long enough, eventually your players are gonna become trained on not every problem has to be solved with go here and slay monster. It very well could be that they set up a system in which the hill giant keeps the ants in check and the ants keep the hill giant pacified. So where do your players fit within the food chain? That kind of just depends, right? If they're only going to spend 1 or 2 sessions exploring the area and the apex predator is probably going to be the focus of the adventure, or even just like a potential random encounter, you want it to be something of equal or slightly greater threat that the players can take out. Because they're not going to be coming back and forth to this area, they get to kind of solve the problem right before they leave. But maybe you want to do something where they're spending a lot of time in this one particular area and they're going to explore it. Well, you want to kind of then create the food chain a little bit higher, right? A group of 1st or 2nd level characters is not going to be able to take on a hill giant. But if you say, hey, the hill giant is here, the players get more comfortable with avoiding it and eventually then work up the courage to face it and can take it out. Great, they've done a great service to the community and they have grown and learned with it. Sidebar here. I want you to think about like an official module that really relies on random encounter tables, like Tomb of Annihilation is the one that really jumps to my mind. The way that encounter table is structured is from the entirety of that campaign, which is levels 1 to about 11, right? After a while, about the time your players really hit 5th or 6th level, the horde of zombie dinosaurs that, the encounter gives you is not really scary anymore. And eventually, just with the nature of random encounter tables, but really just the environment in itself, is your players just get too powerful for any of that stuff to really matter. And that's when you really just want to shift to more of like a narrative-focused exploration. Sidebar Drew makes a good point there. What do we do when our players outgrow the food chain, but we're not really done with the environment yet? Well, that's simple. We subvert the expectation. Let's imagine a reality in which both the hill giant and our ants survived an encounter with the players. One morning they wake up and suddenly the town's overrun with ants again. Well, what happened here? We set the hill giant up. Why is the hill giant not doing their job? Your players go, maybe they check on the ants and find that the ant mound is grown exponentially, which implies the hill giant's not doing their part. They then go to check on the hill giant and find it slain with goblin arrows. Well, your players have been around this environment long enough. They're not really concerned about any of the goblin tribes, right? None of them are big enough or brave enough to do something like this. Only to find out that there's a new hobgoblin warlord that's come in and taken out the biggest, baddest thing it could find and is now intending to set its sights on the town for conquering. Well, we've introduced a new apex predator. And you may be asking yourself at this point, but wait, the hobgoblin didn't eat the hill giant. Well, that's because we don't have to look at food chains just as food. See, food is kind of just like the basic concept. It's energy transfer, and that energy could be through influence, power, territory, or even just money, right? Think of a thieves guild. If your players are, these upstart plucky thieves, the biggest mob in the city is the apex predator. See, these chains are all about relationships, and when the relationships are working, it means that as a dungeon master, you already have that prepared, and it makes things a lot easier to make snap decisions on how a player's action is going to influence the world in a sort of ripple effect. So the next time that you're prepping an area, just go ahead and try this method out. Start with an apex predator and figure out what they eat, or who pays them protection money, or whatever, right? Whatever the flow is. Try it from there and start building it out. Build it out as far as you like and as far as you think you need to. And then when you set your players loose in here, let them explore the relationship. Let them figure out how things feed into one another until eventually they're going to be more immersed into this interconnected weave you've created. And all you did was ask the simple question of, well, hey, what's this guy eating? If you enjoyed this video, I'm Dungeon Drew. I do stuff like this kind of infrequently, but looking to get a little bit more frequent. I'm going to be trying to post one video a week from here on out. But if you want to help me out, just give me a like, give me a subscribe. Until next time, I'm Dungeon Drew. And what are you eating?